for most of our evolution, our life has been centered around food because we had to. I've got this hot tip. If you don't eat, you die. And so we have to. We have no choice. It's this thing that happens all the time to all of us, is this relationship with us and some species, whether it's a plant, animal, fungus, whatever, that goes into our body so that we have fuel and we don't die tomorrow or the next week. And so when we remove ourselves from that relationship, we kind of give up some power.
Yeah.
Some power about our confidence in making our way around this planet. You become dependent on a whole bunch of people you have never met, a whole bunch of corporations that put those packets into your cupboard. And as soon as you start to take ownership over those relationships again, whether that's planting lettuce in your garden or picking a berry in the city park or going out and harvesting a big game animal, I think it gives you some strength, some very kind of basic inner strength and confidence and mental health benefits that are all components that we don't talk about when we think about food.
What's happening, folks? Welcome to Your Forest. My name is Matthew Kristoff, and on this podcast, we talk about the environment and the science of sustainability. Today's episode was super enjoyable. Kevin Kossowan came on with me today, and we've been talking about doing something for a couple months now. I've been hoping to get out to his camp to see him in his element and what he does, because what he does is super cool, and you guys should definitely check it out. First and foremost, where I found out about him was through his TV show called From the Wild. And it's a TV show about foraging and cooking wild food. And I really loved the way he does it because he's about, accessibility, doing it with ease, but also taking the time to do it with intent and with thoughtfulness, with mindfulness. And I really loved his show because it paints a different picture of the forest that some of us may take for granted, may not really focus on, may just miss entirely. And I think it's a really awesome perspective that I hope other people can learn from and maybe help incorporate some of these ideas into their own perspective in nature. Because it's a very cool thought. And I mean, it's something anyone can do. Go out into the bush, forage a little bit, throw a little something into your next meal and think about that, reflect on it and appreciate it, and think about how that changes your perspective on nature, right? This whole season of Your Forest has been about challenging our perspectives on nature and just seeing what other people have to think about it. And Kevin is a perfect person for that example. So, he does all kinds of things. He actually does foraging walks with people, teaches recipes. He'll actually has a field cookery camp where you can go out to his place just north of Edmonton, just inside the Boreal Forest, and he brings in other chefs and they'll go foraging and then cook some meal that they've created from the things around them, right? It's super, super interesting. You guys are going to love it. Kevin and I discussed his passion, food. Why is food important? How does that connection to nature, between food and nature, enrich our lives or enrich our perspective and our relationship to nature? And then a little bit later on, we get into a little bit of forestry stuff and just a little bit about values in forestry and how having the perspective of the forest as a food resource may change the way we look at forests, right? And I'm sure Indigenous people, First Nations people would be ringing the bell saying, yes, finally. But it was a really cool conversation. You are definitely going to love it. Kevin's a great guy. Please check out his show From the Wild. I'm going to have there is in the show notes, a promo code for one episode in particular, which we talk about in the show. Season 6, episode 3 is a specific episode that we talk about in this podcast where really I love the episode. It was such a great episode. The very beginning was talking a little bit about forestry, some people who really have a negative view of forestry, and that's okay. And then the rest of the episode was all about art and their depictions of nature and, their relationship to it and how that's changed, not in relation to forestry, but in relation to the food that they've been picking and the bear that Kevin shot during his time there and all this kind of stuff. And it was just a really cool episode. So Kevin's going to give me a promo code for that, so you guys can buy it on Vimeo and watch it. I highly recommend it. It's one of those episodes that I'm going to watch regularly, a couple times a year, because I loved it so much. It was such a refreshing, interesting take on it, and it also got my juices flowing at the beginning with the anti-forestry stuff. I got defensive, and I found that interesting. So I hope you guys like it too. West Fraser is the number one sponsor for 2021. Without them, this would not be possible. Thank you, West Fraser, for all of your support. It's very much appreciated. Greenlink Forestry is also a sponsor, been with me since the beginning, and I could not be more thankful for their help. Couldn't do this without them. Thank you, Greenlink. Damaged Timber is the last sponsor. They are a company out of Edmonton, Alberta, and they go into the bush and wildfire burn stuff, cut down those trees, turn it into stuff you can put in your kitchen. It's super cool. Check out damagedtimber.com. Put in your forest tenant checkout to get 10% off. Now, let's dive into this conversation with Kevin, all about forest values, foraging, hunting, eating from the forest, enriching our lives with simple things, and a little bit of stuff about forestry near the end. Interesting conversation. Here we go. Why don't we start out just talking, can you describe this place where we are and what you use this for?
Yeah, no problem. We're in, we're on a chunk of land that I've recently purchased in the last couple of years in the Tuatna River Valley, which is the reason we're here is it's the early margins of the boreal forest from the city of Edmonton. And we got into this space to teach people about the plants and the fungus and the animals that grow and live here, and trying to connect them to that food by actually serving them those ingredients in a culinary capacity with multi-course, chef-made dinner or lunch kind of stuff out here. So it's really an educational facility. It just doesn't look like one because we're actually in a forest at my kind of outdoor kitchen here.
But it's awesome. Like, even just the aesthetic of the outdoor kitchen is, I want to say, nostalgic, but it's rustic and it's cool. It seems not primal, but it's like simple and it works, and it's just neat, right? Like it's a cool idea.
I kind of early in my career had it baked into my ethos around being in the forest and pointing cameras at things, which is my occupation for a living, to not have, plastic in the forest and that kind of thing. So there really is it's very scarce on plastic here. It's, big 2x10 slabs of tables with legs that are made from tamarack and black spruce, roundwood, and the wood library that I've got here is built out of roundwood and contains multiple species of woods so chefs can use different species depending on what they're doing and what stage of cookery they're at. So it's a fun little chef playground in the forest.
It's really neat. There's something about that. Hey, we've got plenty of wood here. Why not use it? Right?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah. And it's just it's like, for you, it's probably pretty normal to be in a space like this, right? But I think for most people, even people that spend their lives in the bush, they may be used to, canvas tents and wood stove and cooking on a, propane burner or something like that. But this is something else entirely, in that you have full, like, kitchen tables out here that I'm assuming you built out here. I'm sure you bought the
dimensional lumber and the nails are about all that came in here, and some stain. But yeah, I mean, it really is it's pretty rustic. There's no question about that, but also was designed to be functional so we could do food service for 20 to 30 people. So there's kind of a hybrid, and have learned over the years, in just doing culinary projects for From the Wild, that of what was most useful, and what's useful is countertop space and a sink to do some cleanup. And now we haul in all the water. There's no running water. There's no power. There's no gas. There's no anything. It's wood fire and water that you schlep up a hill. So it makes you, it's good because it gives anybody that's working in the culinary industry here a real taste for what it's like when you're cooking in the field, in the bush. And I think it's a nicely connected way. We can, as you kind of referred to, there's a lot of opportunity to put contemporary barriers between you and the forest when you're spending time in it. And we can bring all of the accoutrements of our city into the forest if we want, which is I'm not an advocate of. I kind of feel like if you're coming out here to spend time in the forest, then eat at the table that's in the forest, and cook on the table that's in the forest, and eat the most importantly is like eat the flavors that are in the forest.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, even driving up here, I don't know what I was expecting, because I've seen like on your Instagram, you have the picture of the outdoor kitchen here and everything, right? It's all up. But driving out here, I was like, yeah, I wonder like how I'm gonna know this is your spot, right? And I'm driving along expecting like maybe there'll be a little driveway or something, and no, just the road and then a sign that says From the Wild. And I'm like, where's the entrance? Oh, there's the game trail that I follow into the thing, right? And I'm like, man, like, this is really just left as is kind of thing, right?
It's
like,
walk-in only, which I put that on the website, and a few people have asked, what does that mean? Mm. It means you only walk in. I don't know how to rephrase that to make it more clear. They're like every board and log and nail and screw and whatever is up in this camp has been schlepped in by me up a hill, and it's not fun because we're in a river valley, so it's a bit of a hill. And we had debated putting a parking lot in here early on, and really got talked out of it. And I've started to value the fact that it is a walk-in experience. We can walk in from the other side of the property, and people can just meander through the bush for a half hour and then pop out in our kitchen, which is a pretty neat experience, a pretty neat way to immerse folks in this space, and definitely not normal. Not that we're doing it to be unique or try to be innovative. It's just trying to keep it simple. And it's funny because there's lots of things in life where cookery is one of them, where sometimes the more you keep it simple, the more profound the experience for folks. The more you intervene, and the more it waters it down and dilutes it and screws it up. Good ingredients are like that. The more you play with them, the more they go sideways.
Right. Yeah. No, that makes sense. Well, it's like, it's interesting because like we say it's rustic and it's real and it's of the right here. But at the same time, it's incredibly aesthetically pleasing and beautiful. Like you look at, like, you got all this like beautiful crystalware up there, and you've got like antlers kind of and some skulls decorating some things, and you've got these beautiful wood bowls, and like it's also a beautiful kitchen.
Yeah,
right?
Thanks. I appreciate that.
So it's simple, yet you've still managed to make it look like you very much care about it, right?
We do have silverware and antique china and antique crystal. And yeah, I mean, ultimately when food's getting plated out here, it is you'd find similar stuff in fine dining restaurants. So we definitely want the food to be elevated and make that point that it's not fancy food for the sake of fancy food, but it is taking the time to plate it right and having talent in here that can do that job. And trying to change how folks think about what we eat in the field. I don't know why this becomes so important to me, but I'm really tired of bagged food, especially out here. Like to bring in ingredients from a foreign country in a piece of plastic that you boil some water and add to the stuff to eat your ration to then get on with your day. There's a time and place for that, and I get it. And it's not that I don't understand certain types of trips, especially needing something along those lines. Mm-hmm. But the vast majority of time, I think we could do so much better. And that industry, it's one of those great things that there's not a lot of industry motivation to have you be self-sufficient, knowledgeable about species, independent in the bush, and not need the stuff. Mm-hmm. Any industry would be more motivated or is motivated to sell you more stuff. Yeah, so the more they can package a food and sell it to you for $13 a meal that you eat in the bush, the more they'll do that, and the more they'll be incentivized to do that. And I fully think that I spend my entire year eating none of that stuff. So again, this is what we're here doing, is teaching people how to kind of, people are generally not always eating out of a bag. I'm not suggesting that, but
sure.
But evolving from kind of that culture to something a bit more holistic when we're when we're outdoors.
That's a cool point. Actually, I never thought about that, because you're right. There's a lot of people who are like, they love the outdoors, they're passionate about it, they go on hikes and they're super into ultralight hiking, and they spend every waking moment camping and stuff like that. But whether or not they would have the capacity to sustain themselves without those freeze-dried meals, right, is like, yeah, that's a different question entirely. That's a different type of connection than just being in it. Now you're interacting with it and actually trying to sustain yourself off of it, which is, yeah, it speaks to, a more real way, I would think, of being involved in nature and having a relationship to nature. That's not just one of an observer, but one of an, you're part of the ecology, you're interacting with it. And it's cool. I love it.
Well said, man. You're a participant in it. You become more a part of that space. And you have a more profound, you used a couple words. One was connection. It really is a connective experience, both with the people that you're playing with in the field and trying to figure out how to, whether you're hunting or foraging or whatever you're doing, achieving that task, but then also folding all of, the ingredients that surround you into a dish. It is connective to that ecosystem and does give you a different, way of thinking. Part of it is about sustaining yourself. I would think if I had to make a case for why, I would say that connection thing is way more important. To be able to come and sit at our dining room and eat a dessert with hazelnut and blueberry on it because it's in a blueberry patch surrounded by hazelnuts is just bloody awesome. Yeah. It's not so much about, living off the hazelnuts and putting it in your trail mix. It really is just about that idea that, wait a minute, there's these things, these plants, these fungi, these animals all around us, almost in any ecosystem you would travel in, and I know certainly in Western Canada, that we do eat and can eat and just generally don't pay attention to. And that's I'm not criticizing, because that was me for most of my life. So I understand that the reasons, culturally for that, but it's fun to be exploring that space.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Yeah. It's interesting that we have this grocery store around us. Almost it's a little harder to figure out what you want and what you can use, but it's here and it's largely unused just because, like you said, we have grocery stores, right? So we can, it's interesting that we've, almost with, the industrial evolution and that kind of thing, that in the last couple 100 years, 300 years, that we've kind of stepped away from nature and started treating nature as something other than, like, we are better than, we are other than. And now I feel like with the advent of increased communication through the internet, all of a sudden these conversations are coming back and we're like, hey, hold up, like we're part of this too, right? And like, why there's so much interesting, tasty, beautiful things out there in nature that we could be using, that would be enriching our lives in every sense of the word. But we just don't, because it's inconvenient, right? And we've almost, trying to word it properly, but we've almost negated the experience for convenience. You know what I mean? Like, we'd rather.
I know exactly what you mean. You're 100. I couldn't agree with you more. I think I could say all those same words. On the table here behind you is a bunch of stuff we picked with our foraging walk this morning, having people out here just learning about different things. And one, to your point, one of the species on that table is shaggy mane mushrooms. And if you know shaggy manes at all, you know that they do not last for more than a few hours before you have to cook them, and they turn into an inky, gross mass. It's something, because of the nature of its perishability, that you would never, ever, ever find in a grocery store or even at a restaurant. And they're flavors that are unique. Like, shaggy manes do not taste like a button mushroom or an agaric from the grocery store. They do not taste like morels. So if you never go outside and never engage with nature at this time of year, pick those mushrooms and eat them, you'll actually never know what those taste like. Yeah. And they are flavors, and that's just one of an example of many species of a flavor that exists out here that's absolutely worth your time and celebrating. And if you, like I said, if you don't go outside, you'll just never know it existed. So there's lots of examples of that. So I agree with you entirely.
It's interesting. Like I said to you before we started recording, I think I was drawn to your art, to From the Wild, the TV show that you have specifically, because I think I felt very connected to it in that I think it filled a gap in my knowledge base that I knew was missing, but have yet to engage in, just out of, like I said, it's inconvenient, right? It's hard to do. It takes time and you have to dedicate yourself to it. But I love that I was able to sit at home and watch this show where you would explore the local, like literally we're an hour and a half from my house, right? And just far enough that we're into the forest and not in the prairies anymore.
Yep.
And I'm in this stuff all the time. I work in this stuff, and yet I negate to collect that food and that knowledge, just because I don't know why. I'm not sure why, but I was just connected to the idea of your show, and it's a really cool way, and that I think you represent in nature and food from nature in a very real way, not in a way where it seems curated or I don't know. It was just real, right? It's realistic, and I think that really drew me to it. And I love the show. It's awesome.
Good. It's for the record, it's very undesigned, especially in the last few years, where we enter a space at a time of year outdoors. Half the time I'll have plans, and they just completely get ditched for what nature has on offer, and then we have to figure out, oh, okay, well, what are we going to do with this? And so the show really does document just me and some friends in the culinary industry figuring stuff out for ourselves. It's certainly not as you've probably become aware, it's not a how-to. It's not like, here, I'll teach you how to do X, Y, Z. It's really how we're just kind of documenting it, like I said, how we're figuring stuff out for ourselves. So, it's I do know why you haven't built that knowledge base. It's because it really didn't. There was no cultural asset there for us.
True.
I would say we spent a lot of years. I think I'm a reasonable bit older than you. Spent a fair number of years post Second World War trying to make everything conveniency all the way through the 60s, 70s, 80s. It was like more packaged, more, hey, you don't even have to boil your macaroni anymore. You can just throw it at this packet in your microwave and eat in 1.3 minutes. It's like, that's literally how ridiculous we got. And then recently, now they have Kraft Dinner flavor packets that are cotton candy flavored.
Oh god!
So you've taken food and made it so debaucherously ridiculous. It's literally asinine.
Yeah.
So I think what's happened actually is the local food movement is what I can point to that was a real obvious change, where people started to really dial into like, oh, I wonder where this food's from. Wonder how far it's traveled. Actually, the 100-Mile Diet was a book that really changed a lot of minds. It unfortunately made a lot of people's focus drift to proximity. So local as in like, how far is this from me? I don't think that's entirely relevant. I actually think the local food movement needs a new word, even though I think people have a good grasp on what that might mean in a broader sense. But it bled into kind of Instagram came up and people got really proud of their foodieism and their knowledge about eating out and cooking at home. And the Food Network kind of, spurred some stuff for a few years before they went all cooking competition-y. And then really we're kind of finding ourselves in a new era. From the Wild was born 8 years ago, at a time when I was looking at what do I produce for content, and the local food movement had already produced a lot about sustainable pigs and lovely market gardens and all kinds of great things that we should support locally to us for food from agriculture. But there was really very little dialogue in the world of wild food, and I had grown up on the stuff to a large degree. So it seemed like this place that we could go from a culinary standpoint and explore a lot of new ground and uncover a lot of new ground. And I had no idea how deep a rabbit hole it was. And here we are 8 years later, just kind of feeling like I'm just now starting to get good at it after 8 years.
I just assumed that you had always been, like you said, I guess you were in the world a little bit because you grew up on wild food a little bit. You never really, so you weren't this engaged until the last 8 years, till the show came up, kind of.
No, not even close. So I grew up on moose.
Yeah.
We picked one mushroom, that was shaggy mane, coincidentally. One berry, high bush cranberry, would be my level of familiarity with wild fruit. We really had a very narrow window into the world of wild food growing up, even though we lived off of it a lot. The biodiversity thing really came just from one, wanting to explore flavors, but two, it's one of those things where the moment I started teaching foraging, once you start teaching, you get held to task on your knowledge like on a regular basis. It's a really good teacher because you have to brush up on all the things all the time.
Yeah.
So that's been a really good teacher too, and I've been teaching it for, I guess, 3 or 4 years now. But it's a deep subject. Like you mentioned, I don't mean deep as in profound, like thinky, but it's deep as in complex layers. Yeah. There's so much to it that expecting anybody starting from scratch to have a hefty handle on it quickly is unrealistic. So if you're starting from the beginning and you hunt and you're thinking, how do I fold other flavors into my food? You really start to think about, okay, what about fruit? What about fungus? What about plants? What can I bring into that a dish related to my hunt? It's as simple as that. And then once you crack that nut once or twice, you'll want to do it again. And then you'll be in a different ecosystem trout fishing on a stream where there's sorrel and willow and fireweed and other wild ingredients that you can then fold into that dish or that exist around the stream that you're trout fishing in, and so on and so on. So it's fun getting I feel like I get airlifted into different ecosystems, like dropped from my home turf into various places around the country, and then it's a kind of a fun game of how do I bring this place onto a plate.
I love that idea. Yeah, it's funny. I think I'm only in the last, probably throughout the podcast, so the last 4 years, that I've started to look at food in a different way, especially wild food, and just trying to, even just cooking anything, even if it's not wild, but cooking anything, trying to make something that is more than just fuel, more than just something that tastes good enough that I want to eat it. Looking at it as something that it is telling us some kind of story or some kind of, I don't know, it's something interesting, right? And I think hunting was the easiest way into that. So that's kind of how I started to expand, right? It's like, okay, I'll start incorporating like leaving bone-in roasts and having bone marrow seep into the juices, and then starting to, just like weird stuff like that, and just trying to using caul fat and maybe using some more parts of the animal that I would just discard or whatever, not use. And that kind of led me down this path, eventually led me to you, right? And into this more, I mean, we both know Kelly Harleton, who I've had on the show a couple times, talking a little bit about wild food and also survival and stuff. So I had a little bit of that knowledge growing up because Kelly was part of my life, but I never applied it. And for whatever reason, I never applied it, and it took until now for me to start to want to try and do that. So I can definitely thank your show for inspiring me to that. So it's cool. I think your show has allowed me to strengthen or increase the breadth of my relationship with nature, I think, because I've started to connect it more to emotion and more to like starting to appreciate the artistic qualities of it more than just the scientific, ecological health or that's cool type stuff, right? So I think your show really helped me step into that because I never really had that. I was always I've said a few times, I was probably a bit of a scientific zealot for a few years, right? Just very much about like science, and still am, but also recognizing the importance of emotion and bringing that into our lives, right? And so, I wanted to thank you for creating the show because it's definitely provided me some perspective that I was missing. So,
well, I'm glad. It sounds like we're I guess serving the function that the whole project was meant to achieve, which is just moving the needle a little bit and allowing other people to learn kind of with us and along with us on our trip through all the same things that you're talking about. Quick kind of side note on Kelly Harleton. I respect the heck out of that guy. I actually call him Luke Skywalker a lot because to me, Morse Kohansky was like Yoda of bushcraft, and Kelly Harleton's like Luke Skywalker.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah.
So that's funny. And then also a weird connection. I was just in one of the backcountry trips we just did on the sea kayaking was with Tyler Harleton, who's cousins with Kelly. So they're related. So this small world in this. And Tyler's currently harvesting grapes in the Okanagan. So.
There you go. Yeah. Yeah, it's funny how it's all. I think that's when I started with my email to you. First of all, I was like, hey, so I think we both know Kelly.
Yeah.
That's a connection.
Great guy.
What do you think about doing a podcast? Yeah.
Great guy.
So I want to get into food and your relationship to food and why, like, how did you get into this? You went from, like you said, having moose cooked 4 ways growing up with, you know what I mean? More out of probably sustenance than a connection to nature or whatever. And then into what you do now, which is a culinary experience and immersion. What is food to you, and why is it something that's worth exploring in this way?
Ouch, what a question. What a gigantic question.
I know. It's kind of... but it's also the most fundamental, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, I got exposed to like the finer end of food, if you will, in Europe when I started to travel a bunch when I became an adult working in finance. I have a commerce degree and I'm a finance major. And when I was working downtown, looked very much forward to escaping the office tower and getting somewhere that had great food. And then once I was exposed to it, it led, and by it, I mean, I had multiple trips to countries like France, exploring every single region and what they had to offer. It's pretty eye-opening when you travel 3 hours in a different country and the entire food culture changes. For example, from Normandy to Bordeaux. It's insane. And so I came home from some of those trips just kind of loathing and disappointed in the food culture at home. That part of that was my own fault for just not being well educated or never having, like you mentioned, like just not having the skill set, not having the knowledge, not knowing where to begin, I think is part of the problem.
That's a good one. Not knowing where to begin. Right?
And so I started digging into food. I didn't like my occupation very much. And so I spent as little time working as I could and as much time in the world of food learning how to cook, like basically from very basic stuff. Getting okay at that. And then my career really shifted when the local food movement started. I was kind of a large voice in that movement in this province. And I was writing a blog about local food stuff that I was growing, farms that I was visiting, basically I went through my entire food system at home, looked at every ingredient, for example, pork. I think that was one of the big first ones. And thought, well, I buy pork at the grocery store, but what's the best pork? Where can I get the best pork? And not from like an elitist foodie standpoint, but just from like a quality or I found that conveniently a lot of times when you found really good ingredients and went straight to the source, they were also less expensive. So there was this kind of fun win of like, wow, I can actually win at the economics. Mentioned I was a finance guy, and also get better quality. So that was a fun dance for a number of years, completely reinventing all the food ingredients in my house to be connected to the people in my community that grew flour and that grew animals, pigs and beef, that grew vegetables. I started planting fruit trees in my yard and connecting with Operation Fruit Rescue to get all of our fruit supply from the city. And it wasn't long before, a heavy way through that process that I thought about meat and I thought about, what's my connection to meat? Am I willing to, if I'm going to make something dead to eat it, am I willing to do that myself? I hadn't shot a big game animal since I was 17. And so I got back into hunting. I'd been off of it for probably 12 to 15 years. And so that started a different exploration, out of the world of agriculture into the world of what I'm starting to not like the words wild food. Wild just by itself implies, and I've been careful because the local food, name really, misled kind of some of the needs there. Wild foods kind of imply that it's again that the other, you know?
Yeah.
And I really think I've started calling it non-agriculture food, which is just mean any species on the planet that we didn't intentionally plant there for us to eat in large and in a scaled way.
I gotta say, wild food is a lot sexier.
Yeah, I know. Sorry. Yeah. Not agriculture food. I'm not going to win an award for that one. But when I got into that space, and it didn't take long for me to realize that there's both the neat culinary exploration around what does a lake trout taste like out of the ice from spray lakes in the middle of winter. like just the actual food outcome is explorative and more interesting than what does the pig from that farm taste like versus the pig from that farm versus the pig from that farm.
Yeah.
Because all of a sudden it's a new species and you're in a new ecosystem, and that trout tastes different than it would if you fished it out of a different lake in the summer. And there's more complexity and layers. And then you also fold in the life experiences, as you know, as an outdoors person, that you're stacking a food experience with actual memories and kind of visceral life experiences of being on the ice and this blue ice in the middle of the winter and hiking in the snow and getting punished by elevation and all kinds of really memorable things that if you just were to go to a farmer and buy something as a food product, you have none of those life experiences, none of those memories, and none of those layers of connection. So I found that you mentioned that word connectivity earlier. I think that's probably the overarching motivator for me. I wanted to know the people that were raising my food, both from like just a trust standpoint and because I could then choose the quality of care applied to whatever it was, from a grain of wheat to a cow. But when I got into the outdoors, the layers of connectivity that you could fold in were way more complex, way more interesting, way more dynamic, and there's just so much to take away from it. So ever since I would say it took us 3 years of From the Wild to really figure it out, to figure out kind of what the possibilities were out here. And ever since then, it's just been, I don't know, the years have slipped by. It's been one adventure after the other adventure after the other adventure.
Oh, you can tell that from the show, right? Like it's just looks like you're constantly having fun, like we were saying earlier, challenging your assumptions, kind of, trying to do something new and creative that you've never done before constantly. And that changes how you view the forest, right? And I think, like I was telling you earlier, I think what this podcast has turned into is trying to challenge our assumptions of nature and our relationship with it and what we should be thinking about it or our relationship to it. And yeah, the food one is one. I don't know why it's so overlooked. It's interesting. I guess it's like you said, right? We didn't need to look into it, so it got overlooked. But
I think it was cultural. Yeah. Our value system pointed us in a different direction, which was one around ease and, ease.
Yeah.
And I think folks have really come around to understand that is one benefit to, or one characteristic of an eating experience is how easy was it. But I think we're looking for and know that we can achieve more than that, says a lot of culinary experiences that you might have been exposed to in the last decade or two.
Yeah. Yeah. In the age of 9 to 5 and then getting your kids to dance and hockey and trying to find 30 minutes to make a meal. Like I get I have a child too, and it's challenging, right? It's hard to find the time to do it, but if you can make the time, like, what do you think people miss? You know what I mean? What is lost? Because you talked about the experience and that connectivity and kind of stuff, but in a day-to-day situation, like how do you think it affects people's lives, their mood, the way they experience life? When they aren't connected to their food like that, what do you think's being missed?
Oh, great question. Meaning?
Yeah.
And I know that sounds weird, but for most of our evolution, our life has been centered around food because we had to. I've got this hot tip. If you don't eat, you die. And so we have to. We have no choice. It's this thing that happens all the time to all of us, is this relationship with us and some species, whether it's a plant, animal, fungus, whatever, that goes into our body so that we have fuel and we don't die tomorrow or the next week. And so when we remove ourselves from that relationship, we kind of give up some power.
Yeah.
Some power about our confidence in making our way around this planet. You become dependent on a whole bunch of people you have never met, a whole bunch of corporations that put those packets into your cupboard. And as soon as you start to take ownership over those relationships again, whether that's planting lettuce in your garden or picking a berry in the city park or going out and harvesting a big game animal, I think it gives you some strength, some very kind of basic inner strength and confidence and mental health benefits that are all components that we don't talk about when we think about food. I talk a lot about when we go into the grocery store, we don't think in the produce aisle, like what what impact will these vegetables have on my health or my mental health or my physiology? And when you get out into the wild, you end up having those kind of thoughts. I have to teach that when I'm teaching plants. I have to teach people like this plant also has medicinal qualities, because guess what? That's where those things come from, is this, the nature. So you might...
It's all derived from plants at some point, or animals.
Yeah.
It's an interesting one. Like, I think it's in an age of convenience, like you said, the age of the internet, the age of entertainment, right? I think that's a good way to put it. Age of entertainment. Everyone's like, I can't speak to the psychology of people, but it sure seems like people have more crises of mental health, right? Like, people seem to be more anxious, more depressed. Just, they can't seem to find the meaning or the purpose in their life, and they struggle to just be happy on a day-to-day basis. And they look outwardly to try to accomplish some grander scheme goal, or some, try and be beneficial to society or to people in some way or another, and hope that enriches them. And I think that can, right? It can and does, for sure. But I think for me, what I've noticed is what really enriches me the most is the little things and the day-to-day, and the, like you said, feeling like the things that you do have a meaning, as simple as, I don't know, making a cup of tea from stuff that you pulled from the bush, or as, I don't know, like, there's, like you said, the little things, right? Like the way it feels for me to watch my 2-year-old daughter, inspect an ant and try and like be fascinated by a leaf on the ground or something. The feelings that gives me when I'm paying attention to it. Most of the time you're not. Most of the time I'm just flying through life and I'm just like, yeah, it's a leaf. Okay, let's go. But when I take the time to like try to empathize with her emotion and what she's experiencing, all of a sudden it becomes fascinating. And this moment, which would be normally mundane, is now enriched and has meaning and is a memory that I will have, right? And I feel that applies to food in some way, in ways that I'm just learning, right? And that, I think doing things with intention, like everything with intention, I think enriches your life in a way that we've completely overlooked almost.
I think a danger in scaring people off from that connectivity is implying that every meal you always have has to be some profoundly connective, only wild food ingredient experience.
That's a good point too.
I've been trying to back off from that a bit, because we definitely did go down that road, and the odd time still do, where every ingredient is connected to that place. But we went through all of season 7 going, wow, we really need to. It was like the comfort food season, not because we're trying to be clever or fully by design, but we had like pronghorn hot dogs and mule deer donair, actually, that we cooked right here in this kitchen.
That's awesome.
Outside, and fun stuff that we eat on the day to day. Bringing food connection into your life, I think, shouldn't be binary 0 and 1. It should be some type of gradient that fits well into your life, and do the things like you kind of mentioned about folding different things into your life as you learn new things. I think that's probably the way to approach it. I just feel like it's kind of a necessary disclaimer, because it's easy I love riffing on the complex, but to not peel it back to, like you said, those very simple moments. That is what it's about. So to put some fresh fruit on top of ice cream that you picked in, like I said, in a park near where you live, that is it. Mm-hmm. That is fully good enough.
Yeah.
And anything that you can add, trying to be clever beyond that is for the sake of being clever, and or just to expand what you're working on as far as your connection to that place. So don't overthink it.
Ultimately, it should just be fun, I guess. Should just be enjoyable.
Yeah,
there
should be some ease in it. Yeah. And I think if you're forcing it in, dogmatically forcing anything into your life is probably not a really great idea. Mm-hmm. And that because, like I said, because we eat so often, there can be some ease in it. Like I'm on the table here, some black currant preserves that I put up recently. That was some work. Yeah, it took me 2 hours at night, but now I have multiple jars of this stuff. And I can easily, with ease, slip it onto a dessert or put it on a piece of toast, or it can go into a sauce. Actually, it'd make a really great sauce with some red wine and some butter and some garlic and some spruce, for example, on a piece of venison. That'd be really great. So it can easily be incorporated into my life. And there's lots of opportunities. I think even anyone that's ever big game hunted or hunted an animal, actually, big game's a good example. You hunt it once, it gets butchered, and then you can fold it into your life. As you use up that animal, you get the opportunity to have it multiple times, different ways, try different things with different cuts. And so I think all of these foods kind of need to be thought of like that. How do I integrate this in an easy way?
Yeah, no, that totally makes sense. And when I really dial it back to like food and what I like about food, like my favorite food is like a hamburger and hot wings, right?
Yeah.
Like there's no connection there. It's just goddamn delicious, and I love it. And it's like, and I'm just going to continue to do that, right? Because it's good. But I think putting that intentionality in when you have the time to do so, or making the time to do so, I think it speaks a lot to your, like you said, to your helping your mental health in ways and making you feel like you're part of this thing and not just a observer of it, right? Participating in it. So yeah, no, I love that concept. So diving into more deeper into like the wild food concept, do you think that like you said, I think people might think, oh, I have to go out like deep into the bush and go find some random stuff, right? But you also mentioned, you can go in the river valley in Edmonton and just, there's plenty going on in there, right? Like there's always high bush cranberries. I'm constantly pulling those off in September and sucking on them, and there's all kinds of stuff. And so I feel like there is also an accessibility to it that people may forget about.
I think a fundamental error that folks make, and including me, this is why I know for certain, because I've made the same error. When you live in a city, again, you've mentioned the other a few times, and I love that idea kind of just philosophically about how we approach things as humans. We're pretty bad at that.
Sure.
Let's recognize that as humans, even just other humans are, we're not good at treating the other properly. And when we live in the city, we think of the city as a city and not a whole bunch of concrete and glass in a wild space, because ultimately that's all it is. So I live in a city that is plopped around a river system, and the native species in that area are still there. Mm-hmm. It's just we've paved a lot of it and put a lot of grass in a lot of places. And I think there's kind of that fundamental misconception that we are somehow detached from nature if we live in a city. And as a guy who lives in a city, me, I can tell you that we absolutely do live in nature. I do, like you mentioned, I lead people on walks regularly and introduce them to native species that are exactly in our ecosystem, 2 minutes from my house in the middle, smack in the center of a city. And the beginning of the whole process for me, again, I feel it necessitates to say it over and over. Starting small is really important. Yeah. Those high bush cranberries are a great place to start. Mm-hmm. 1 or 2 fruits. Learn one mushroom from a friend of yours that mushroom picks. Learn a new plant and call it a year. Yeah. I'm not saying like that's your outing. I mean, that's a year's worth of work. Why? Because do that again next year, and by year 5, year 10, your repertoire is broad. Mm-hmm. That's the only way I know the amount of knowledge I have about the outdoor spaces I play in is because of many, many years of learning a few new things. From people from just friends that I like to hang out with who also know some things, and we just share knowledge. And that's probably, I would say, the number one way that I've learned things out here.
Just absorbing it as it comes across you. Yeah.
And asking questions and going out with people that know more than you. Yeah. I think that's a really great way. I have some really great dear friends who are experts in various niches of this space, and whether that be mycology or the botany side or any of it, and or biologists who work in wildlife management. It's fun just asking them questions and engaging with people in your community. And that's another thing is I don't really care what community you live in. There's people that work in those industries, that work in forestry or conservation sciences or water sciences. If you're interested in the outdoors, those people are fascinating. They have all kinds of knowledge. Now that's probably like the advanced level. I think step 1, pick the the high bush cranberry.
Yeah, pick the high bush cranberry. They're easy to pick out.
In the world of food, if there's kind of one heavy lesson takeaway from both From the Wild and my general involvement in the world of food, is that the community that you develop is really, really important. And is one of the most valuable things that I have developed in my career in the world of food. I've got friends and colleagues that I respect to no end all over the planet. And that when you enter the world, you might hunt with one or two people, but broaden your community beyond that to some people that might pick fruit or some people that might pick mushrooms, and you'll learn a heap. And those relationships are easy and fun, and it's fun to go for a walk and learn new things, and then you can share what you know because you'll know stuff that they don't know, and then it's kind of like a positive feedback loop. Everyone just wins. It's just a really beautiful win-win when you build that community. So I'd encourage people to think about how they can do that. It's not something, and again, kind of culturally and values wise, community building isn't something that we've done a really great job of teaching people how to do.
Sure.
I don't think I had a good skill set on how to build a community. I just did it by flukes to some degree. But so if community building sounds like really scary words to you, I can relate and understand. But it is as simple as just like taking that one step of, I know this person, or I have a friend who's got a friend who goes to pick morels every spring. Maybe I'll give them a quick message and see if they mind taking me. It's as easy as that. Yeah.
Yeah. Especially if it's like easily accessible, right? Like I know I run into that issue with hunting, because I'm one of the only people in my friend group that hunts. I don't know, odd man out, I guess. So I get a lot of people like, yeah, I want to come hunting with you. I'm like, yeah, sure you do. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, let me know.
Yeah,
and
exactly.
I've had probably 20 people say they're going to come, and two have followed through, and they still hunt with me now, right? So the people that I have taken, and they're people who have the same thing you were thinking about, right? About if I'm going to eat meat, I have to be able to do this thing. And they were like, okay, I'm either going to be into this, or I'm not going to eat meat ever again, kind of thing.
I was
right?
there. I was wondering that. That was asking those questions. Yeah.
Yeah. And so, and both of them were like, yeah, no, I'm okay with this. Like, this makes sense. Like, it's all good. But anyways, I don't want to go down an ethical conundrum about meat eating or anything like that. That's not what this is about. But so when it comes to like developing perspective on nature and that kind of thing, and I think, cause like I said, we're kind of, I think as a society, we're starting to romanticize nature a little bit more. We're starting to try and get back to it. People are, even people, finance people that were, maybe not involved, middle of downtown Vancouver or something. Now they're getting out, going hiking and trying to experience that, right? And that's awesome. I love that. But it's hard to develop a perspective on nature, one that is comprehensive, right? Because I think there is a lot of romanticism about it, which is good. I like the romanticism, but there's also a realism about it, right? And that this is something that we depend on. It's something that we live with and evolved with and whatever. And so when it comes to like developing, I don't know, a comprehensive or a well-balanced perspective on nature, do you think the food helps with that, and how so?
Yes, it does.
Like especially for people, especially for people, say people who have a perspective, like people like myself that are, maybe they're foresters or they're conservation biologists or they're whatever, geologists. How does this help to, broaden their perspective and maybe make it better in, quotation marks?
How does it broaden their perspective?
How have you noticed that it has? Like, what kind of effect do you think that this experience has on people that you've noticed?
The learning of how to broaden their cookery scope out in the field. Is that what you mean?
Yeah, just like the concept of like I said, this whole before we started recording, I was talking about this season of the podcast. I've been trying to just look into other people's perspectives, right? How do they see nature? How do they see our relationship to it? And with your show and with the concept of field cookery and encouraging people to eat more wild food, I wanted to know how you think that changes the way you look at our relationship to nature, right? If it changes how you perceive anything from recreation to industry or that kind of thing.
Well, I think the fundamental of the why I do this type of work to get people connected, because I have a pretty busy career in the film and television and video work world. The reason we get people out and like introduce them to plants and introduce them to things is because it does change their perspective on the valuing of a particular place. So instead of this becoming, again, the other or the bush, it becomes, that place that we pick hazelnuts or that place that we pick wild strawberries or wild asparagus or whatever it is that you do or hunt. And the end goal being that maybe if we had some type of cultural attachment through food to this to the boreal forest, for example, maybe we would treat it more kindly. And you could use that, that goes to the oceans too. When you first asked the question, the first thing that popped to my mind was salmon, farmed salmon. And understanding food, does it help you understand the issues around oceans and salmon fisheries and salmon farming and the plight of salmon spawning? And do you care more because you eat salmon? I would say the answer is absolutely yes. You know, one perfect species to talk about for this example is caribou in this province. It's something we don't eat. We have teddy bears and not teddy caribous in our baby cribs. And so nobody has a point of reference for that.
That's a good
point.
And
so it's being extirpated and nobody cares. I shouldn't say nobody, but kind of relatively speaking,
the broader
nobody.
Public is relatively unaware of it.
Yeah. And, so would we be better off if culturally we had some type of attachment, food-wise to that species? I think the answer is yes. And you could say, well, yeah, but that would imply that you're killing that species. And,
yeah, that's another rabbit hole. Eh?
Yeah. Well, and the answer is, well, maybe yes. Maybe like you talked about ceremony and other ways that you can connect with a species, whether it be or an ecosystem, maybe we would have some type of traditions around or value set around that particular species that would make us care enough to do something about it. And so, do I feel that having a food connection to something helps with a more, a broader understanding of how to engage with that space as a human being? I think that's a no-brainer. Absolutely, yes.
That's awesome. I think you managed to take my confused questioning and make it something that makes sense. So I appreciate that. So, yeah, I think that was kind of what I was getting at, right? Like when you look at our relationship to nature as human beings and in society and how we relate to it. And I would agree with you, right? Like the more you can involve yourself with those things, the more you care, the more you start to educate yourself, the more it changes the broader society starts to relate to it, right? So
yeah, and industry wise, we didn't touch on that really, but when industry and I'm the last guy to point at corporations and go big bad corporations, because corporations are like robots. They're a legal construct that we built that to create profit for shareholders. Like there's not much more complexity to a corporation than that. And I think people like to hold them up as big bad guys, but corporations,
it's easy to, right? They're faceless.
Yeah. Corporations are there to basically, like I said, they're like service robots. If we ask something different of them, they'll do something different.
That's a good point.
In seeking of shareholder profits. So I am quick to flip that around and go, well, if corporations are doing X, Y, Z that you don't approve of, it's because that's what you're asking them to do. Quit asking them to do that. Have a different value set. Make different consumer choices. So, I don't know how I ended up down that tangent, but I think it's an important idea when it comes to industry that impacts nature or the ecosystem. I know I've been vocal when it comes to forestry practices and so on, and I think that or how, for example, fish farming. There's examples of different ways to do it. There's good ways and bad ways. There's good agriculture. There's bad agriculture, in my opinion. And you could say I could say the same about forestry practices. So. It's easy to, like you said, to point to the big bad corporations, but I think we really have to ask about our, how we're contributing to that, how we, and even sometimes in a very passive way, like the paper towel you might use, and where that came from, caring a bit more about that, caring a bit more about, and that's actually how we ended up on this about, if you end up educated in this space and your value system makes you care about the caribou, maybe you will be on that organization's board or volunteer to do advocacy work for the government or for a corporation and stand up for that species and go, hey, this is actually important to us. We need to do something here. They'll listen. And if there's no voice ever, then they'll do nothing. Yeah. So anyway, I think...
No, for sure. That makes sense. I like the way you described it before we started recording. You said there was... how did you word it? There was almost a spectrum that industries work within, right? And you were like...
Yeah.
You said something about there's the... Oh, there's a squirrel right there. What's up, buddy? There's the far end of the spectrum, which is the agricultural, or we use forestry as an example, practices that you completely disagree with and think that are consumptive and non-regenerative and non-beneficial. And then there's everything in between to the stuff that you think is totally acceptable and good. Or like if you use agriculture or food as an example, like you are in that realm as well, right? So like you said, there's a spectrum and there's a place within that is good. And yeah, when we talk about something like forestry, I think it's something that's easy to vilify in that, like a cut block doesn't look pretty, right? It looks bad. Like people don't like it. And that's fair, right? And that makes sense. But then we start to look into why things are done certain ways, then things start to make a little bit more sense. But forestry is an interesting one in that I firmly believe that, forestry in Alberta and in Canada is the most sustainable forestry in the world. Doesn't mean that there's not room for improvement or room to continue to grow, because the good thing about it is it's constantly challenging itself, right? Like the universities are constantly challenging industry to upgrade and do things differently. And the people within it, something I say constantly is, there's a forester out there who got into it because they love 2x4s, right? Like that's not what it's about.
I
right?
say all the time, I've never met a farmer who said, I'm out here to do the worst job I possibly can. Yeah. Everybody's doing the best they can.
Exactly. So they're trying to do, and so, we can dive into I was telling you earlier, one of the best episodes I think you did for me that I loved the most was, I think it was episode 3 or episode 4, season 6, Understory.
Yeah.
One
of those episodes.
One of those. And I think I loved it the most because it started off in a cut block, and it started off with these friends of yours who are also artists, and one's a writer, one's a chef, one's a painter, and presumably the chef seemed to have some kind of context and understanding of what's going on. But the
former accountant, and he'd worked in pulp and paper accounting.
Okay, there you go. So he had some relationship to it. But listening to the writer, sorry, I'm pulling a blank on
That's
her
okay,
name. Jen, and listening to her account of it, her, the way she described it is like, it sounds like this Orwellian nightmare that's just terrifying, right? And I can see how people see that, and I understand, and I think that's good that you have platforms for something like that, because what it does is it forces industry to look back on themselves, right? And go, okay, how do we respond to what this person who has a very strong emotional connection to nature and what their concerns are, right? Can we address their concerns? Are their concerns being cared for? Are their values being looked after, right? And I think that's awesome. I love it. And so the reason I love that episode is because it took me through this interesting roller coaster of emotion, from being like, oh, what the fuck?
Yeah. What are these guys talking about? They don't know what they're talking about.
to this artistic landscape where you went from the painting, the writing, the culinary, and also you had the photographer there as well, and one yourself, right? Videographer and you do scores and musicians, so you're very much in that world too. And I loved the takeaways, right? Like I loved the rest of that episode, but tied with that, I loved it even more with the beginning, with the forestry, the naysaying or whatever. I loved it even more because it just provided an interesting cross section of like, hey, these are thoughts that people have, these are concerns that they have. But you also brought up the hypocrisy of it too, right? Like I wipe my ass with paper towel. I use wood, live in a wood frame house.
Hopefully toilet paper, but yes, I know what you mean.
Yeah, or paper towel. Sorry, yeah.
And stick frame homes, and we all use those products, and so obviously we can't. It's like we all eat. You can't just point fingers at all food production and go, "I'm just not going to participate in that." And I think that's the big question: is how do we participate in that? Whether it's food or forestry, how am I participating in this? Yeah. How do I participate? What impact do the choices I make have in this space? And I think that's those are the interesting questions.
The way someone in that episode related it to, they're like, these actions are an appendage of myself, right? So like I am equally responsible for whatever actions we take on the landscape because I eat, I live in a house, I live whatever, right? And so I thought that was an interesting connection, right? Because it was like, we're also responsible. And then we have to look deeper into it and decide, are we okay with this impact, right? Or how could we do it differently in that we're being more balanced or more ecologically healthy or more just thoughtful, I guess.
Throw it in there, more mindful to other species.
Mindful.
I think that's one of my big
Absolutely.
objections in how we harvest timber in places. The methodology is that it's very singularly focused and at the expense of a lot of other species. And agriculture is the same. Like
Sure.
it's not like forestry is the only industry that has room for improvement. I think every industry in the bloody planet has room for improvement. And I'm glad to hear, and I'm glad to see and meet people in the industry that are. The benefit of forestry is that there's a bunch of people, like you mentioned, that are outdoors people that really care about nature. So that makes it a really easy, in my opinion, an easy industry to improve on and to refine and to reform, because you've got people that really have a sympathetic ear. There's lots of industries, and even agriculture is a bit one of them, like grain farming. Once it gets to the stage it's at, there's not that people don't care for the land, but the compassion for a particular square foot of land or a particular grain is it becomes commoditized.
Sure.
Both it absolutely becomes commoditized. Whereas I think it's easier for a forester to see the forest for the trees. Wow, that really fit.
Yeah, no, it's I find myself questioning, I'm not questioning, but I find myself investigating and wondering how we do things and talking to people and constantly asking questions about, okay, why was this decision made, right? Why do we burn slash piles? Why do we do cup locks the way we do them? And they don't call them clear cuts anymore because they leave retention patches, or supposed to, right? But that kind of, like what you guys were in was, you could say it's objectively a clear cut. There's residual patches, but it's a large piece of land that's been harvested for quite a while, right?
It looks like post World War I.
Yeah, it looks like bombs went off or something.
Exactly.
You could say, right? Yeah. And when I start to look into why those things are done, you start to realize that there is intentionality behind it. And I'm not sure what your relationship is to forestry, or if you know what goes into it and that kind of thing. And I'm not here to try and convince you of anything, right? But I know that the more I've started to look into it, speaking to people like Ellen McDonald or Vic Leifers, or people at the university that aren't really directly tied to industry, and asking them their opinions, you start to realize that, like, no, I think from my perspective, at least, the forest industry as a whole, there's bad players. Like, I personally know there's bad players out there who do shit that I think is not ethical, right? But there's also most of it is not that. Most of it is people who are constantly going out of their way to try and do something different, try and do something better, right? Do you know about the EMAND project?
No.
Ellen McDonald's very involved with that. It's ecological management emulating natural disturbance is what it's called. And it's a 25 or 35 year study where they're trying to figure out what is the best way to do forest harvest, right?
Yeah, I love it.
From an ecological perspective. And they do all these tests and all this kind of stuff. And that's what I love about it, is that I think the more I engage myself with industry, the more I engage myself with these people, these researchers and professionals, you realize that the intention is there, and not only the intention, but the actual, most of the time, good things are happening. Things are being done in a good way. However, that being said, I do see the hypocrisy of that when I think about, there are different ways of doing forestry that may help. One way I think is where forestry is headed is to do understory protection, right? So that would be in a stand like this that we're in, right? Kind of a mixed wood stand. If you had mature aspen and you had a B or C, like a really dense understory of spruce, you would come in, you'd pull up the aspen, let the spruce grow up, and that's a more natural succession way, right? So there are arguments for it. And what I love about these types of discussions is challenging those ways of doing things and challenging the way we think about it, so that industry and people can start to rethink their intention or how they do things, right? So it's good. And that episode, I'll tie this all back to that episode, right? And that it just allowed me to see a different way. And that I started off kind of angry, if I'm honest, right? I was kind of like, what the
defensive?
Come on. Yeah, defensive, totally. Because that's my life, right?
Yeah.
And then into, no, those are reasonable things to think for people who are just coming across this and don't really have any other context for it. I'm like, that totally makes sense. And why wouldn't they think that? And that's on industry for not telling that story better, right? And not being out there and showing that those values are being protected and that kind of thing. So anyways, I don't want to sit here and this to be a pro forestry thing, but I loved that episode because it challenged my emotional response to something that I shouldn't have had an emotional response to. Right.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah.
One just to add to your
rant.
Rant. One thing I thought was really cool actually is a buddy of mine lives up in the Peace Country, and he does reforestation, I guess, or planting. He does mostly carbon offset tree planting, and just gaining an understanding of maybe half a dozen years ago or so that that industry has even evolved from replanting with monoculture to replanting, which again I was against vehemently just from a agricultural background. That this idea that we could actually evolve into something that was again more considerate about the species, the topography in the low-lying areas. Maybe we aren't just planting this uniform pine forest to regrow. Is a great step forward, and that's I don't have much information on when that change happened, how it happened, or whatever. But I do hunt in an area where there's uniform pine growth, and see how that impacts wildlife movement because I hunt a lot, and it's interesting to see that even just something as simple as replanting and reforestation, how that can evolve so quickly, really, in the grand scheme of human history. This is a really, it's a fast moving target, a fast moving industry, which I think it's again speaks to who, like you're talking about, to people who are doing some big thinking on, this is how we do this now. What could we do better? How can we do this better? How can we, and there's some huge issues. How can we, handle and deal with something like mountain pine beetle or burns and stacked up fuel in forests that haven't burned for 150 years. Like what do we do with this? There's a community built next to that, or there's a species at risk in there. Like it's a complicated nut to crack. So
we're very tied to what nature is right now, right? In a lot of ways that I think a lot of people haven't realized. Yeah, and that's that. And you mentioned something that I could relate back around kind of social license is the idea that you're mentioning about having random observers who don't spend a lot of time in what we would call the bush, in the boreal, whether they're from a different province or just an urban context. Yeah. You're not wrong that when you flop those people into the operation, their reaction might not be positive. And I think it's big of you to ask, like, okay, but why? What is it that's offending their sensibilities? What are we doing that maybe isn't working for the innocent bystander human being? And again, that exact same thing applies in agriculture. I think I've been involved with the beef industry when they're asking those same questions, like, social license is important for actually selling heads of cattle. So maybe we should pay attention to this. And what are the things that aren't working? What are the things that maybe we need to change? What are the things that we're doing right that people misunderstand? Yeah. Those are all great questions. What a great place to be, moving your industry forward from. So, it's certainly, forestry's not alone. Well, we'll talk off air I can give you some resources just to inform some of your understanding a little bit more, and then continue. But what I love, like I said, it's continue to question, continue to ask those questions, and feel free to shoot me an email or a phone call anytime to talk about more detailed stuff, right?
Appreciate it, yeah.
Because it's stuff that I myself want to be comfortable with and confident with, and right, like I've always said, what I'm an advocate of is I'm an advocate of sustainability. I'm an advocate of doing the right thing, right? And that means balancing the human relationship to nature because like nature also has value that's non-economic. That, you know what I mean? We both understand that, and everyone listening understands that, right? So I love constantly trying to question those assumptions and just make sure that, is this the right thing? Should we do this? And like you said, I think ethically speaking, most people hold themselves to task, right? Like there's a lot of people I think that work for an industry that they go to work every day and go, man, this is really messed up what we're doing, but I need a paycheck. Like, unless they have to, right? It happens, of course. But most people in Canada, I would say, are probably doing it because they believe in it for some reason or another. So, well, it was more, I wanted to go down this route more just because I think there's value to people that are, doing forestry or doing environmental management in some way or another, to start to incorporate your perspective of a more involved attitude towards nature. You know what I mean? Whereas, like, I think a lot of foresters, they hunt, right? Or they're involved. They might forage a little bit for blueberries or mushrooms or something. But to really go, when you get the opportunity to really dive deep into it and really immerse yourself like this, I think lends a big opportunity to broaden and strengthen the relationship to nature, and again force us to ask those hard questions, right? And really ask it of ourselves and ask it of, is this the right thing to do? So
and it's easy. I have to leap in too. It's easy to look at the economics and say, but the market won't bear that. The price would have to be 20% higher to accommodate some XYZ better, air quote, better, policy that might please, again, the innocent bystander public. To which I've said, in the world of food, then we need to charge more for the food. Yeah. People spend so much money on other stuff that is really not that critical to the environment or to our day to day. I think we can spend more money on the things we put in our body that become part of our physiology because we put those things in it. And I think we can spend more money as consumers to make sure that we're doing the best possible job that we can as far as the footprint that we leave, in this case specifically, I would say in the boreal forest. Agriculture is a whole different discussion, but the boreal is, again, a place that we probably could do better. Great. And there's, like you said, there's people that are working on it, and I love that. And I just want to, again, the point being to challenge the idea that, but it can't happen because people won't pay more, and just say, screw that. The only way that this can happen is for people to pay more. That's just how it's going to be. I find that frustrating. It's frustrating in the restaurant industry where people are like, but the consumer will only pay so much, so we can't treat our staff properly. It's like, well, then screw the consumer. Like, make them pay that. Don't just go to the bottom price all the time. That could probably be, and I don't know anything about the economics of timber, but I suspect that it's very similar to the commoditization of a wheat crop or in anything, that as soon as it becomes a commodity, you start to make sacrifices in other areas, and then you start to ask questions around, well, can we value add? And again, I know jack squat about the value adding of the forestry industry, but I know that in the agricultural industry, I know producers who that's the only way that they've made a viable, sustainable business is by participating in value adding. And and I know that there is value adding in forestry that probably adds to the economic output of a square mile or square kilometer of forest. So, it's not like we've, and I know you would agree, it's not like we've, exterminated or explored all options. There's always room to rethink and improve and
absolutely,
and move forward.
Absolutely. No, I don't think any industry is ever at the end like, we figured it out, we're done, we'll just keep doing this forever.
Got it. Yeah.
It's like, no. We're constantly learning, right? We're constantly learning about the world around us. Like, I mean, you look at like Suzanne Simard's work with mycorrhizal connections between plants and trees and everything. And that's something that 20 years ago we didn't know about.
Amen. And 20 years from now, I've got 3 kids, and that's what they're growing up with.
Right.
So they're going to have a very different lens. And it's one thing that's interesting as you get older is to kind of understand what was, this goes all back to, huge, heavy indigenous issues. Like, what were what was the cultural awareness? What was the paradigms? And what were my grandparents dealing with? And what was their knowledge? down to our generation, what was the kind of lens that we grew up with, down to our children of what are they going to be growing up with? Well, climate change, for example, won't be something that they're debating.
No, no.
It'll be something that they've spent their entire life hearing about and trying to solve.
Yeah.
As a reality.
Just a reality.
Yeah. So like you mentioned, the idea of the reforestation side being biodiverse will just be something my kids will have always only known. They things like that. So it'll be neat to see. That future.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and it's I can say a lot about the forest industry and the value added and all those kind of things. But what I can say is that if I'm being honest with myself, I think about it. In their plans, in the way they do things, they have to consider all these things, right? All the values, objectives, indicators, targets, they call them voights, and they have to add, right? They have to do the water, they have to do the climate change, they have to do biodiversity, species at risk, indigenous values, all that stuff's in there. It's all in the plan, right? And it is. And you read the plan and it sounds awesome, right? And a lot of it is good. But then when you really start to dive into the details of it, yeah, some of it does start to fall short a little bit. One example, talking to a gentleman, Milo Mihalovic, who's just so well thought out, he's just really thought about all the issues. He talks about we need to start treating some of these values as co-values instead of constraints. So up until now, that's one thing I'll say about the forest industry is more out of it. Not that they've been ignoring it, but more out of not understanding enough to be able to do it right properly yet, is that most of these constraints like water or biodiversity or an eagle's nest or whatever, they just treat as constraints. Like, okay, stay away from that and stay away from this and don't do that, which has worked fine. It's kept those things okay, right? It's protected those things. It's stopped them from going away. But now we're at a stage where the ecosystem-based management is taking off, right? And people want to do this. They want to start not just constraining the forest industry, timber harvest by these other values, but actually trying to promote all things and improve everything at the same time, lift the whole forest up, not just avoid wrecking it kind of thing, right?
Yep. And treating it as a renewable resource that's of tremendous cultural value and value to the entire planet.
Yeah. And that's what I think is at the core and the heart of what foresters and what environmental professionals believe and are trying to accomplish. And right now we're figuring that out, right? And it's interesting to be a part of that, because it's constantly, like you said, right? It's constantly improving, constantly changing, constantly trying to make it better, and that's what's exciting about it. But I think voices like yours are often poo-pooed as, hippy dippy or whatever shit like that, which is not helpful, right? And it's like, for example, I had a conversation early on with a gentleman who was saying about the caribou issue. He's like, we don't need like CPAWs at the table. We don't need these environmental groups at the table. And I was like, well, I completely disagree. Like, although I don't agree with CPAW's method or some of the stuff that they do, I don't agree with their message entirely. Their intention, I believe, I'm with them on the intention, but the way they decided to go with things, sometimes I don't believe, but their voice is absolutely needed at the table because they speak for a giant portion of the community, and you need to have all perspectives at the table. You can't just get rid of the ones you don't like.
Yeah, amen.
Right?
Yeah.
Like, you need everybody. The more perspectives, the better.
And I feel that way no matter whether you're on we'll just use politics, the far left or far right of an issue. I do think that whole polarization, which has become an even bigger problem in our society, broadly speaking, but that I agree with you. You need to have all the voices there, or you're not making a balanced decision ever.
Absolutely. Because everyone, well, especially in forestry, because it's public land, right? Forestry in Canada is almost all public forest that's being managed. So the public has every right to know what's going on and to
interesting point.
Right? So forestry is one of those ones where they're very aware, right, that if we don't do this right, we can get kicked off the landscape. We can have no business, right? And to me, that would be a tragedy, because I see forestry as part of the solution towards our not our economic problems, but to our climate change issues, to our the situation that we've got ourselves in as far as fire suppression, right, and fuel buildup over the last 100 years because of that. And I see forestry as part of I see forestry as a way to, like, we can profit off of the forests, economically speaking, as long as everything else is taken care of first, right? Like, if we're doing something that's reducing the impact that the forest has, or its richness, then I think we shouldn't be doing forestry there, right? That's personally my perspective, and I think that's shared with a lot of people, and that this should be something that is, we can benefit from it, but we can't be taking away from it, right? But
I can't disagree with that. Obviously, I guess
it makes sense, right? But it's also, is that what we're doing? I don't know, right? And that's part of what this podcast is trying to figure that out, kind of, right? Like, we're saying all the right things. Are we doing the right things? Like, let's find out. I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
I sure seem to think that we are, but I'm also me, and I'm talking to people that I want to talk to, and probably not talking to the people that I don't want to talk to that maybe have information I should have, right? So who knows what the reality is, but I personally choose to believe that from the science that I've seen and the people I've talked to, that it is going in a good way. But I can totally understand the lack of communication from the forest industry to describe what they're doing and why they're doing it. It's terrible. It's abysmal, right? Like it's part of the reason they're
in their defense, largely unnecessary, because the majority of the population couldn't be bothered with how forests are managed on the whole.
Yeah, that's true.
So I don't blame them for not focusing any attention on that. And just for the record, I have absolutely zero intention of being like a advocacy group, anti-forestry advocacy person ever. That's absolutely not at all.
Yeah. And I didn't get that. I didn't get that from the episode or from anything. Yeah. It was more of my emotional response at the beginning. I was like, oh, damn it, what the hell is this? But then I realized that there's a concern here. And is this concern being met? And is there a better way? And let's figure this out together. That's what I got from it.
Yeah,
right?
Good.
But it'd be easy for someone to walk into that going, I can't do that. That's not realistic or whatever, right? But that's what art is. Art is representation. Art is impressionistic, right?
And just to back up to it, I mean, the whole context of that scene and the reason that it was included is because we drag people from all walks of life, from different areas. Jen Cockrell-King is a food writer from the Okanagan, from Naramata. So despite being originally from Alberta, we bring her into our main camp, and we're driving by cut blocks and getting like the innocent questions a kid would ask, the ones I like. I like those questions literally that my kids would ask when they're 5. Yeah. Like, what the heck happened there?
Yeah.
And I take it for granted. I see these things all the time, but you explain it as it is. And the kind of that emotion or that kind of response that we recorded was not fed, it wasn't spoon fed of like, hey, can you behave XYZ? Thankfully, From the Wild's far more documentative than that. It's just, you get the response of, this is how we deal with this resource, and wow, this is not what I expected, and and so on and so on. So I think it's we left it in there because I like challenging, and as you do, I like challenging our what we're up to on how we handle this planet, whether it's in a forest or in the oceans or in the world of food, because I've been questioning the world of food for almost 20 years now. Or I guess 20 years now. It's kind of a constant state for us in the series, and as you've probably observed, to ask, is it okay for me to catch a white-tailed deer and then with a tranquilizer gun and then release it after I took my photo with it? Well, no, that's illegal. But I can do that with a trout. And why is that okay?
Sure.
How is not having to terminate a fish and just throw it on the ice as an ice fisherman and let it suffocate to death? How is that okay? But we would never do that to a bird or to a cow or to a pig. So asking those questions has almost become it's almost become fun to ask those questions. Like, weird.
It is fun.
Well, that's weird how we kind of behave as humans, that this is socially acceptable and that's not socially acceptable. And that's really illogical and makes no sense. Yeah. And the same applies in this case to that question about forestry. Like, oh, let's dig into that a bit.
Sure.
Why are these big machines? And one of them one time at our camp leaked a whole tank of oil all over the ground. And it's like, wow, hey, look, no one came to clean that up. Well, that really sucks. Why is that?
Pretty hard to defend that one.
Yeah. Yep. And pieces of forestry machines. I mean, when I first was getting vocal about, and it's funny because I don't even find that I'm that challenging when it comes to forestry, but I posted a picture of a cut block and someone, I might have called it a clear cut or something.
Yeah,
and someone got defensive in the world of forestry.
Yeah.
totally find that understandable. So you're not the first person in forestry to take me on and go, hey dude, maybe we need to check, like, why do you have such a gripe or about forestry? And so I started to text them examples of like, this is garbage from a track that's left in the forest, and this is pieces of plastic culvert that are all over the place in the boreal forest that are just not cleaned up. And here's a gigantic oil spill, and here's some used condoms that are stuck on the lease in the area where we put our camp. And someone literally like took a dump in our camp and left their shitty shorts hanging on our bunk one time. Like, these are the other interactions and the types of things that are obviously in some cases funny and forgivable, right?
Sure.
But in some cases, systemic, and like the culvert chunks left everywhere that I feel like I want to clean them up and post a picture online just to give somebody some accountability for that kind of stuff.
Totally.
And I've been told, we'll complain to the local forestry operations. Like, why? What are they gonna? Then I'll be on some list of.
True.
This is the activist dude that's an a-hole that you don't want to have to deal with. I don't want that either. So,
but it's true though. No, you're right. Like when you think about our relationship to nature as a society, we tend to, like, you can be walking down some beautiful path in the middle of Banff and there'll be garbage everywhere.
Yep.
And these are people that supposedly give a shit.
Yep.
Clearly not enough, right?
Yep.
And so I think anytime you have people interacting with nature, you're going to have things that nowadays, things that you don't like about it, right? Because people can be idiots.
Yeah.
And it sucks. And unfortunately, people are involved in forestry too. So
some
people make
error
bad decisions,
is totally
right?
understandable.
Yeah.
So are accidents, like a spill of oil. I totally understand that. And so
but it's also understandable for you to be upset about those things.
Right. And so
totally
exactly. And so is, I think, the human stuff, the very human stuff is human body fluids and function
shitty
stuff.
Shorts,
is actually fully understandable, and that's not a systemic problem that needs to be resolved. But the leaving of equipment parts and chunks of just basic gear and I don't even supplies, all those things is something that obviously shouldn't be happening and is happening. But if I'm going to get angry at that, I'll also get angry at the dude who's throwing beer cans on my road here. That happens all the time. There's stuff that happens all the time all over the planet that probably shouldn't be happening. But I think, like you said, the forestry industry, I think one of the takeaways for me of this conversation is going to be the fact that you mentioned that it happens on public land, and that the public therefore gets a say. If someone wants to do something in the world of agriculture that I don't like, that's their land.
Yeah.
They get and that's their farm, and they get to do whatever they want. The part that I get to participate in is to not buy from that farmer and not buy from whatever system they might supply, which is easier than you'd think, actually. I think a lot of people think, oh, that's not possible. It's entirely possible, trust me. Whereas in the world of forestry, it is a public space. It is a shared space.
Absolutely.
Never really even thought of that, really, but it is a shared space, and so there's that extra layer of accountability and transparency to some weirdo like me that's pointing cameras at nature out in those spaces and is aware of some of the impacts of those things.
Well, that's the thing, right? The forest company has tenure, so they have the right from the government to remove trees, right, and then make sure that those trees come back. But the forest is still a public forest. They don't own that. That's just, they have the right to go in and take the trees and take care of that space and make sure it comes back to a certain stage, and then they can walk away from it, right? But yeah, absolutely, it's a public space, period. And like I said before, I don't think forestry can only happen if it's protecting those other values and making sure it can't be degrading of nature and those other values, right? So that's ultimately what it is to me. And I think we accomplished that in a large part, but there's always going to be things to work on, just like anything.
I
right?
agree.
So it's a never ending, and I think challenging it is necessary. And I think posting those pictures of the cup walk and having those conversations on Instagram is necessary, right? And it's good to have, regardless of, people are always going to be disagreeing, right? Like we're never all going to come to a consensus about something.
Right.
We're always probably going to be talking about old growth logging on the coast, right? We're always going to be talking about certain things that they just are emotionally connective. And so I think more speech is better, right? Like
I agree. Transparency is good, and airing out conversations is good.
Mm-hmm.
I fully agree with that. I actually feel badly for some parts of the agriculture industry where people can't see, like behind the walls of some of the meat agriculture stuff.
Yeah.
Because they don't have the chance to, I guess, defend themselves and or because if once something gets out, it's leaked, or a lot, it gets pretty contentious. Whereas if you're in public view and you're airing out those conversations kind of regularly, and we live in a world where those conversations can happen in social media venues and places where they wouldn't have happened 20 years ago, I think that's a pretty great thing. I also think that it's easy for us to ignore the fact that these ideas around sustainability, a lot of the ecological ideas that exist now, if you reverse the clock even just a few decades of human history, what is normally accepted as socially responsible now would have looked very different a half century ago, and probably will look different a half century from now, and that's okay. Like you said, we're on a spectrum, we're on a journey, exploring a spectrum of different ways to handle it based on kind of what's again what our value set is at that given time. So currently, climate and climate change, especially as fires burn and communities get devastated this year. It's been in the news. Whether that's a line or a dot, that the dots that need to connect in a given community that may have burned. But those are issues that people are very presently aware of.
Absolutely.
I think it'll become more and more so. So interesting times, man. Interesting times we live in that the forestry industry is challenged so much with so many interesting layers of complexity. Indigenous, I imagine, and this is again speaking from an uneducated standpoint, but I can imagine that what Indigenous engagement looks like now is very different than a half century ago.
Oh my goodness.
Or an issue
very
like
different from 15 years ago.
Right. Or an issue like mountain pine beetle that was not on an issue 20 years ago. It's like chronic wasting disease in the wildlife management world. Like this is a huge new topic that somebody who is in that career managing those very same species 20 years ago would not have had to deal with at all. And now it's this tremendous problem. So moving targets and such is nature, and such is the nature of kind of the human value set. Absolutely. Yeah, no, it's constantly improving, and like Indigenous consultation, they call it. That's one of the realms where I think that forestry needs to be a lot better, right? And not to say the intention's not there. I know lots of people that are doing their best to try and do it right, but they don't have the tools. They don't know how. They don't even know where to begin, right? Yeah. And so that's where these conversations have to come, and people just have to start to discuss it more. Just have the conversation and not, because it's just, I think there's a complete misunderstanding of how we accomplish some of those things because the conversations just don't exist, right? Yeah, so, I agree. And I think it's a little unfair to expect, it's again easy to point to a big bad corporation, but you have to, I think it's important to understand that there's humans in those positions filling in those seats in chairs going, oh crap, how do I deal with this? Because that's my job. All of a sudden this is a new issue that I really don't know the answers to, and I'm expected to know answers to. And I think that stretches from everything around the situation with the caribou to like you mentioned, Indigenous consultation. What a crazy world, to navigate compared to, again, like you said, 15 years ago. Because people want to be helpful. They want to do the right thing, but the more they try, the more they realize that they're actually doing the wrong. Like that's what I'm learning, right? I'm involved with the Good Fire podcast, which has taught me a lot about Indigenous values and Indigenous culture, and it's opened up a lot of my perspective, a lot of my just view on why Indigenous consultation goes wrong so often. And it's just a misunderstanding of culture and relationships and how those things coincide, right? And these two cultures are clashing because they just don't understand each other properly, right? And it's interesting to watch because I know that there's shared values. I know that there's commonalities there, but they're not being met because we're just coming at it from different ways, right? And so it's unfortunate. But yeah, what I love about these types of conversations is that we just try to do what we were talking about earlier, just try to enrich both of our perspectives and try to enrich the way we think about it in our relationship to nature. And that hopefully helps us balance how we extract from nature and how we give back to nature, right? Because ultimately, without
without all this, we're all screwed, right? Like so we need this to exist in order for humankind to exist. So we need to strike a balance, and that's what we're discussing, right? Is where does that balance fit? How do we do it properly? And it's just incredible.
Foraging side, I encounter people the odd time that will be quite vocal anti-foragers.
Oh, really?
Which
anti-foragers.
Your reaction is very normal. People go, "What?" That's like the most granola thing ever.
Oh, I think.
It's a number of people who believe that if you pick a plant or a berry or whatever, you're going to remove that habitat for another creature in that ecosystem, and that by virtue of you removing anything from that space, that you are committing some grievous ecological sin.
Yeah.
And I just have a fundamentally different perspective that if people aren't culturally engaged with that something in that space, then they won't care about that space. And then when it comes time to make these decisions around how do you properly steward that space, we just don't have a point of reference or care. So it's like, okay, so the caribou are going to be gone. Whatever, people don't care, but they're not paying attention, so they'll be gone in my lifetime and yours.
Yeah.
And that's just the way that I guess it's going to be. But I just think it's really important to have that connectivity. And we talked about how food does serve that function. And some people just don't. And it's going to be the same in forestry. It's going to be the same in food. You know, you'll have your naysayers who just don't believe it's something that should happen. But thankfully, I'm firm in my resolve that I feel that we do need that connection.
Yeah.
And that if we leave everything alone, like I mentioned, that we won't have people who are engaged in care and want to see the right positive change.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Well, and that's another good point, right? Is that the goal isn't to have one perspective or to get everyone to the same page. The point is to have as many perspectives as possible, like we said earlier, and to try that helps us navigate these problems in a more comprehensive way, right? And that you're not saying that people need to think what you think, but like, hey, take a little bit of what I know and see how it applies to your life, and we'll see where we end up in the end, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, the perspective of humans, there's certain groups that want to just wall off nature and be like, yeah, you can't go in there. That's for the animals. And I'm like, well, nature's never been that.
Yeah.
Not as long as humans have existed. It's never been that.
Put it this way. We're at that state where we need to put all of the nature into a museum.
Yeah.
We're in trouble.
Yeah, we're
big trouble.
Huge trouble. Absolutely. Right. Like we interact with it, and we need to continue to do so. And then now all we're arguing about or discussing about is how much interaction, how much extraction, how much do we intervene, if you want to call it that, if you want to make us the non-natural, right? Make us the man-made or whatever.
Yeah.
How much do we get involved, right? And that's what we're discussing, and that's the needle we're trying to follow. But
yeah, you bet.
Yeah, no, this is fun, man. I appreciate you coming on to do this. This is really good. I think we went to some interesting places.
Yeah, you bet.
This is good. But anything you want to plug anything to, season 7, is that out yet?
Season 7's being released right now.
Okay.
And we're shooting, we're just at the kind of tail end of shooting, or midway through shooting season 8, which is crazy to think about.
Yeah.
I mean, plugging wise, you referred to the series a whole ton. Fromthewild.ca is where you find it. We'll get you a promo code for that exact episode, so that anyone listening might want to watch that episode as a reference to see what you're talking about or what we're referring to. They can do that for free.
That's a good idea.
We'll figure out how to get you to connect that promo code to your audience. But no, I mean, other than that, I just love one thing I love about having been challenged, I guess, by folks in forestry in the past is they seem to be abnormally open-minded about seeing different perspectives like you have been. So I really appreciate the openness, as opposed, like you said, your knee-jerk might have been defensive to have been challenged on different ways or outsiders looking in on the industry. I think it's a great opportunity to, like you said, to have those conversations, and the conversations are important for it not to be, like we said, we're very bad at the other thing as humans, to categorize something as big, bad, and the other. So love the conversations and appreciate the opportunity to be on.
Yeah, thanks a lot. Thanks a lot for listening, everyone. I hope you liked that. Please check out his episode, Season 6, Episode 3, Understory. Really, really cool. I know you're going to love it. Check it out. And check out all his other stuff too. He's also involved with Les Stroud's Wild Harvest and a bunch of other stuff. And he's just very active on social media, and you can find all his stuff online. So you can go to fromthewild.com, also kevinkossowan.com. So check that out. Those links will be in the show notes. So thanks a lot for listening. I hope you got something out of that. I hope we challenged your perspective or maybe made you think about things a little differently. I know I did. And yeah, that's what this is all about. Right? So thanks a lot, folks. We'll catch you next time. Take it easy.